In the land of the free and the home of the brave, what if driving a classic car becomes a crime? The US government's new proposal threatens to strip vintage cars off the roads, and with them, decades of American history. Why, and who stands to gain? Stay tuned, because this is more than just a fight about cars. It's a battle over culture, tradition, and the future of freedom. This isn't just another piece of automotive news. This is a wake-up call. The Clean Transportation Act of 2025, a proposed federal bill, is aiming to make vintage cars illegal on public roads. You heard me right. Cars like this iconic '69 Camaro or this beautiful Volkswagen bus? Gone. Off the streets. Confined to museums or private collections. The reason? Environmental concerns. But there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. Think about what this really means. No more Sunday drives in your dad's old Ford. No more car shows celebrating decades of innovation. No more passing down a classic car to your kids. Are we prepared to say goodbye to an entire culture? And more importantly, should we? The Clean Transportation Act of 2025 outlines a plan to ban all vehicles manufactured before 1980 from public roads. The government argues these vehicles are outdated, inefficient, and heavy polluters. Here's what the ban could mean for you. Driving prohibited. Vintage cars can no longer be legally driven on public roads. Tight sales restrictions. Buying, selling, or trading vintage cars would require special permits, fines, and penalties. Owners caught driving banned vehicles could face fines of up to $5,000. The bill aims to drastically reduce emissions, aligning with aggressive climate goals. But does targeting vintage cars really make sense? This isn't just a car, it's a time machine. Every scratch, every bolt tells a story. When I drive this, I'm not just going from point A to point B. I'm reliving the golden age of American innovation. Vintage cars are more than just machines, they're rolling pieces of history. For millions of Americans, they're symbols of freedom, nostalgia, and the open road. But this proposal threatens to erase all of that. Supporters of the ban claim it's necessary to combat climate change. After all, vintage cars can emit up to 20 times more pollutants than modern vehicles. But critics argue that banning them won't have the impact lawmakers are promising. While it's true that older cars are less efficient, they're rarely driven compared to modern vehicles. They make up less than 1% of all vehicles on the road. The environmental impact of this ban would be negligible at best. So why target vintage cars? Critics believe this is a distraction from larger environmental issues like industrial pollution and outdated energy grids. Here's where it gets interesting. Could this proposal be about more than emissions? Some analysts believe this is part of a larger agenda to phase out privately owned gas-powered cars altogether. By banning vintage cars now, the government sets the stage for stricter controls on all internal combustion vehicles, pushing us toward electric and autonomous cars. Follow the money, and you'll find that major electric vehicle manufacturers and tech companies stand to gain significantly from this shift. Could this be more about profit than progress? Car enthusiasts across the country are rallying to protect their rights. Online petitions have gathered millions of signatures, and grassroots campaigns are spreading like wildfire. Even some lawmakers are beginning to voice their concerns. This is more than just a car issue. It's about preserving our history, our freedom, and the industries that depend on these vehicles. So where do we go from here? The proposal isn't law yet, but the clock is ticking, and if we don't speak up now, it could be too late. Do you think this ban is justified, or is it a step too far? What's at stake here is more than just cars. It's our history, our livelihoods, and the open road itself. This is about more than just what we drive. It's about who we are. Share this video, sign the petitions, and join the conversation. Together, we can ensure that these classic cars remain a living part of our heritage, not just relics of the past. If this proposal passes, the roads of 2025 could look very different. Silent, uniform, and efficient, yes. But what about personality? What about the roar of a V8 engine? The glimmer of chrome under the sun? The joy of working on something with your own hands? Are we ready to trade that for convenience and environmental gains that might not even make a significant difference? The data suggests that vintage cars contribute an almost negligible amount to overall pollution. Yet their cultural impact is enormous. If we lose them, what else might we lose along the way? Here's another angle to consider. What role is the automotive industry playing in this push? As electric vehicles dominate the market, the narrative becomes clear. Classic cars are a threat to the clean, futuristic image they want us to buy into. The push for electric vehicles is undeniably important for the environment, but it shouldn't come at the expense of erasing our past. There's room for both, modern innovation and classic preservation. We don't need to choose one over the other. It's not too late to make your voice heard. Here's what you can do to fight this ban and protect our vintage car heritage. Sign the petitions. There are multiple petitions circulating online right now. Every signature counts. Contact your representatives. Let your local lawmakers know how you feel about this proposal. They need to hear from you. Join advocacy groups. Organizations like the Vintage Vehicle Preservation Alliance are fighting to protect our rights. Join their efforts to stay informed and take action. Spread the word. Share this video, talk to your friends, and use social media to keep the conversation alive. This isn't just about cars. It's about freedom. About preserving a piece of our past that reminds us where we came from. These vehicles tell the story of America, the innovation, the craftsmanship, the individuality. Do we really want to let that story end? The fight to save vintage cars isn't just for enthusiasts. It's for everyone who values history, freedom, and the open road. Will we let our government take this piece of our culture away? Or will we stand together to protect it? The choice is ours. This is your chance to make a difference. Of course, not everyone agrees with the movement to preserve vintage cars. Critics argue that holding on to these older vehicles is selfish, that their environmental impact, no matter how small, outweighs their cultural significance. But is that really true? While reducing emissions is vital, targeting vintage cars feels like low-hanging fruit. Their actual impact is minimal compared to modern transportation and industrial sectors. If anything, this proposal distracts from the bigger challenges we face in fighting climate change. So, to those who say vintage cars don't belong in a sustainable future, here's the real question. Why not focus on the bigger polluters instead? Is it really about the environment, or is it about optics? This isn't just an American issue. Around the world, governments are grappling with how to balance environmental goals with preserving cultural heritage. In some countries, exemptions are granted for vintage vehicles to keep them on the road. Could the US learn from these examples? Here we respect the past while embracing the future. Vintage cars are celebrated as part of our heritage. They are driven occasionally, so their impact is minimal. There's room for both electric innovation and classic preservation. If other countries can find a way to keep vintage cars on the road responsibly, why can't we? Shouldn't there be room for a middle ground? What if there's a way to bridge the gap between tradition and innovation? Some enthusiasts have already begun converting classic cars to run on electric power. This preserves the iconic design while eliminating emissions. Could retrofitting be the solution? It's not cheap and it's not easy, but it's a way to keep these cars alive. With more support and innovation, this could become a viable option for enthusiasts who want to adapt. The future doesn't have to be black and white. We can embrace the benefits of new technologies while preserving the treasures of the past. Imagine a world where vintage cars are celebrated, driven responsibly, and kept alive for generations to come. This fight isn't over. If you care about history, culture, and freedom, now is the time to act. Leave a comment, share this video, and join the conversation. Together, we can protect what makes the open road so special. And don't forget, every voice matters. Whether you're a car enthusiast, a history buff, or just someone who loves the spirit of the road, you can make a difference. Vintage cars aren't just a passion, they're an industry. From restoration shops to part suppliers, car shows and auctions, these vehicles support thousands of small businesses and contribute millions to the economy every year. This proposal doesn't just threaten car enthusiasts, it threatens livelihoods. Small-town garages, part suppliers, and even major auction houses could be forced to close their doors if vintage cars disappear from the roads. I've been restoring cars for 30 years. If this ban happens, I'm out of business. It's not just me, it's my employers, their families, and the suppliers we work with. We're all connected to these cars. For many, vintage cars are more than a hobby. They're part of their identity. Imagine being told you can no longer drive the car your parents gave you on your 16th birthday, or that the vehicle your grandfather rebuilt with his bare hands can never touch the road again. This isn't just about policy, it's about people. It's about the memories tied to these machines, the road trips, the late-night repairs, the milestones celebrated behind the wheel. Losing these cars would be like losing a piece of ourselves. If vintage cars can be banned for their inefficiency, what's next? Could similar arguments be made to restrict other historical or cultural items that don't meet modern standards? What happens when preserving the past becomes less important than chasing the future? This isn't just about cars. It's about how we value our history. If we allow the government to erase this piece of our culture, where does it stop? Are we willing to lose more pieces of our identity in the name of progress? One of the most powerful things about the vintage car community is its unity. Across the country, millions of people are connected by their shared passion for these machines. Together, this community has the strength to push back. From local car clubs to national advocacy groups, this fight is already gaining momentum. People are organizing rallies, creating petitions, and spreading the word. It's proof that when we stand together, we can make our voices heard. Not all lawmakers are on board with the proposal. Some are already listening to their constituents and pushing for a compromise. There's a growing movement to create exemptions for vintage cars, recognizing their cultural and historical value. This is our chance to show that there's a better way, a solution that respects both the environment and our history. But it's up to us to keep the momentum going. Let's address some of the myths surrounding vintage cars and their environmental impact. Critics argue that these vehicles are gas guzzlers contributing significantly to pollution. But what's the real story? Vintage cars are driven sparingly. Most collectors take them out only a few times a year. When compared to the carbon footprint of daily driven modern vehicles, or even the emissions created during the production of a new electric car, their impact is negligible. So, if vintage cars are such a small piece of the emissions puzzle, why are they being singled out? Could it be more about symbolism than science? Behind this proposal, there's another story, one of corporate influence and financial interests. Automakers are investing billions in electric vehicles, and they want consumers to buy into this vision. Could this push to ban vintage cars be less about the environment and more about eliminating competition? After all, every classic car that stays on the road is one less reason to buy a new vehicle. Automakers benefit from promoting an all-electric future. It aligns with government incentives and increases their profit margins. Meanwhile, vintage cars, which are often maintained and repaired independently, fall outside this cycle of consumption. The question we should be asking is this: who really benefits from this ban? And is it worth the cost to our history and culture? It's not just older generations fighting to save these cars. A new wave of young enthusiasts is stepping up to keep the passion alive. I'm 22, and I saved up to buy this 1971 Mustang. It's more than a car, it's a connection to a different era. I don't see why we can't enjoy these cars responsibly while still caring about the environment. The younger generation sees vintage cars not as relics, but as a bridge between the past and future. Their passion proves that this isn't just nostalgia, it's about keeping a culture alive for generations to come. This isn't the first time a community has fought back against unfair regulations and won. From farmers fighting land grabs to artists preserving historic districts, there's proof that united voices can make a difference. If we stand together, we can show the government that there's a better way. Every call, every signature, and every rally matters. The power of the people is stronger than any proposal. Imagine a world where the past and future drive together, where sustainable policies embrace innovation without erasing history. That's the vision we're fighting for. The future doesn't have to come at the cost of our past. By working together, we can create solutions that respect the environment while celebrating the culture that vintage cars represent. This is our moment, our chance to make a difference, not just for car lovers, but for everyone who believes in preserving history, culture, and freedom. Let's make it count. Join us. Stand with us. Let's save our classics and ensure that the roads of tomorrow are filled with the spirit of yesterday. Together, we can win this fight. Vintage cars are more than just vehicles. They are rolling pieces of history that tell stories about the eras they came from. Each car represents a time when design, engineering, and culture collided to create something unforgettable. Think about it. The Ford Mustang wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of freedom in the 1960s. The Volkswagen Beetle became a global icon of simplicity and reliability. The Jaguar E-Type was once called the most beautiful car ever made. These cars are woven into the fabric of our cultural heritage. Banning vintage cars isn't just about emissions or road safety, it's about erasing a piece of our collective memory. These cars represent milestones in design, technology, and social progress. So the question is, do we let these symbols of innovation and artistry vanish, or do we fight to preserve them for future generations? In many rural communities, vintage cars are more than just a hobby. They're an economic lifeline. Small-town car shows draw crowds, generate tourism, and provide opportunities for local businesses to thrive. For towns like these, vintage cars are a source of pride and identity. Losing them would mean losing not just an economic boost, but also a deep connection to the community's heritage. We rely on these cars. They bring people together, they bring business to our town, and they remind us of what makes this place special. If they're banned, it's not just the cars that'll disappear, it's the sense of community they create. While some believe banning vintage cars is the only solution, others are exploring innovative ways to modernize them without losing their soul. Enter retrofitting. We take the existing car and replace its internal combustion engine with an electric motor. It's a complex process, but it allows these cars to stay on the road while meeting modern standards. Retrofitting isn't just a technical solution, it's a compromise that could satisfy both sides of this debate. But it's not without challenges. So, what do you think? Is retrofitting the future for vintage cars, or does it strip away their essence? Let us know in the comments. We asked and you answered. Here's what viewers like you had to say about the government's proposal to ban vintage cars. Don't ban them, they're part of history. I drive my dad's old Chevy once a month and it's a treasure. Retrofitting is the way forward. Keep the design, lose the emissions. As the debate over the proposed ban on vintage cars continues to heat up, it's clear that this issue touches on much more than just environmental concerns. For many, vintage cars are a vital part of cultural history, representing not just engineering feats, but also personal memories and a connection to past generations. These cars are rolling symbols of freedom, innovation, and social progress, each one telling a unique story of the era it was built in. Banning them isn't just about reducing emissions, it's about erasing a part of the past. The economic impact on small communities also can't be overlooked. Vintage cars are an integral part of local economies, from restoration shops to car shows that bring in tourists and support businesses. The proposal to ban them would disproportionately affect rural areas, where these cars provide a sense of pride and community. But not all hope is lost. There are innovative solutions being explored, such as retrofitting these cars with electric motors, preserving their iconic designs while making them more environmentally friendly. This compromise could be the key to keeping these vehicles on the road, offering a future where innovation and heritage coexist. Public support is growing and people across the nation are rallying together, signing petitions, attending rallies, and contacting their lawmakers to push for a solution that doesn't erase history. The power of the people is undeniable. If we can come together and demand a balanced approach, we can protect our classics and ensure that future generations will have the opportunity to experience the beauty and history of vintage cars for years to come. This is a fight that goes beyond cars. It's a fight to preserve our collective legacy. The outcry surrounding the proposed ban on vintage cars in 2025 has ignited a firestorm of debate, not only among enthusiasts but also in broader cultural and economic circles. Vintage cars are more than just machines. They are time capsules of innovation, capturing the spirit of bygone eras. These vehicles tell stories of design revolutions, cultural shifts, and personal milestones. A 1960s Ford Mustang isn't just a car. It's a symbol of the American dream. Volkswagen Beetle evokes simplicity and connection, having served millions as an affordable and reliable means of travel. To ban these vehicles from the roads is to erase living history, disconnecting future generations from the legacy of human ingenuity and resilience. These vehicles remind us of how far we've come, not only in technology, but also in the values and aspirations of society over the decades. Beyond the cultural significance, the vintage car industry serves as an economic lifeline for countless small businesses and communities across the country. Restoration shops, parts suppliers, classic car dealers, and auction houses thrive because of these machines. Rural towns often host car shows that draw visitors, stimulating local economies. For many mechanics, restoring and maintaining vintage cars is not just a job. It's a calling, passed down through generations. Families gather to bond over rebuilding engines, and enthusiasts network to share knowledge and passion. The ripple effect of a ban would be devastating, threatening to close small businesses and undermine the livelihoods of those who have built their lives around these vehicles. For communities that rely on tourism from car events, the proposal feels like an existential threat, one that would leave ghost towns in its wake. One potential solution gaining traction is the idea of retrofitting vintage cars with electric motors to meet modern environmental standards, while preserving their iconic designs. This process, though still in its infancy, has been heralded as a way to bridge the gap between progress and preservation. However, retrofitting poses challenges: high costs, a lack of readily available technology, and the concern that converting these vehicles might diminish their authenticity. Critics argue that while electrification might make them more sustainable, it strips away the essence of what makes a vintage car unique: the roar of the engine, the smell of gasoline, and the tactile connection to a bygone era of craftsmanship. Still, for some, this compromise offers hope. a path to keep vintage cars alive and accessible while addressing valid environmental concerns. Ultimately, this debate is about more than emissions or legislation. It's about how we value and preserve our heritage in a rapidly evolving world. The ban on vintage cars is emblematic of a broader tension between the past and the future, tradition and progress. Are we willing to let these rolling works of art be sidelined in the pursuit of a singular vision of modernization? Or can we find a way to celebrate and preserve our history while embracing sustainable solutions? Across the country, car enthusiasts, historians, business owners, and everyday citizens are rallying together, determined to protect the cars they love and the culture they represent. Their message is clear. Preserving the past doesn't have to come at the expense of progress, and the fight to save vintage cars is, at its heart, a fight to preserve a piece of who we are. The battle to save vintage cars is shaping up to be a defining moment for how we balance heritage with environmental responsibility. While governments and industries push for sweeping measures to address climate change, critics argue that targeting vintage cars is a symbolic gesture rather than an impactful solution. These vehicles, driven sparingly and cherished for their rarity, contribute minimally to emissions when compared to modern cars used daily, or the carbon footprint of manufacturing new vehicles. Public advocacy has become a powerful force in this debate, with grassroots movements leading the charge. Across the nation, car enthusiasts are organizing rallies, writing to lawmakers, and flooding social media with petitions to counter the proposed ban. The collective voice of this community is growing louder, and it's resonating beyond traditional car circles. Historians, artists, and even environmentalists are joining the conversation, calling for a more nuanced approach. They argue that preserving vintage cars doesn't mean ignoring environmental concerns. It means acknowledging that solutions can be multifaceted. Encouraging retrofits, implementing stricter emission standards for everyday vehicles, and investing in cleaner fuels could all coexist with policies that allow vintage cars to remain part of our shared cultural fabric. Ultimately, the fight to save vintage cars is about preserving something far greater than the vehicles themselves.